Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Thanks for joining me today as I continue my never-ending quest for historical knowledge. Today I'm going to be watching the first video from a very popular history channel, Historia Civilis. This has been recommended to me since day one of my YouTube channel, this channel in particular. So I'm a little late getting around to it. But we're going to go ahead and get started today. So I had so many videos recommended for from this channel that couldn't really just pick out one. So went to their channel and went through and just kind of filtered through popular videos. And this one was one of those that popped up, and I thought it sounded really interesting. It says the longest year in human history. So I believe this channel really kind of focuses on ancient Rome. So that's really the only expectation I really have right now from this channel is just about, Rome itself. Depending on the level of detail too, would probably change how much comments, I give, because a lot of these super specific channels, they have so much more detail than, you would just generally learn, even as a history teacher. So hopefully I can learn a lot and you kind of join me in there. I'll try to add things when I can, though. All right. Okay, before we get started, though, want to always promote the original video. If you like the original video, make sure that you go to the original video, which will be there'll be a description or a link in the description, I should say, and you can go ahead and check that out. Give them a like and subscribe. If you like what we're doing here, make sure to like and subscribe as well. I'd love to see you around. This video also in the series was often came up in my Patreon polls. Patreons right now of all donation levels get to participate in a weekly poll for videos that get on here. Historia Civilis barely lost out a couple weeks ago, but it's kind of back here, and I wanted to get to it anyway. All right, enough talking. Let's go ahead and get started. This is called the longest year in human history, 46 B.C.E. Let's check it out.
In the summer of the year 46 B.C.E., Julius Caesar returned to the city of Rome, a victorious general. All of his military opposition had been squashed, and all of his enemies, save for Labienus and a couple of Pompey's sons, had either been killed or forced into submission. This precise moment, when Caesar returned to the city, was a major turning point in Roman history.
Sure.
For years, Roman politics had been getting weirder and more dysfunctional, but now was the time when things really go off the deep end. Before Caesar could even make it back to the city, the Senate took it upon itself to offer him unprecedented political power. His dictatorship, which was due to expire in a few months, was extended for an additional 10 years.
So yeah, all right, so they're starting just kind of on the eve of what'll kind of eventually be this consolidation of power by Caesar. A lot of people look at this as the transition point for kind of the end of the Republic as it was kind of known, for the last good 500 years before this, and then kind of eventually ushering on the kind of birth of the empire, as will be a little bit more official after Caesar, with Octavian, also known as Augustus, who will be succeeding here. So all right, so he's been dictator. He's been kind of stopping some of the other competition going on. Headed back there, they're going to give him another extension of the dictatorship. Again, dictatorship in Rome is not actually new to Julius Caesar. It's kind of put into their sort of constitution, where in times of imminent danger, they can appoint a dictator for executive powers. And this has gone on before, and it has gone fine before, as far as like somebody coming in, coming back. One of the famous stories was Cincinnatus, who was brought in, basically had power for a while, and then it was over. He went back to his home, and I think he was a farmer after that, and just kind of continued on with his life. So today we have this idea of dictator as automatically like repressive, right? But that's not what that necessarily mean back then. Okay, it was more of just a position in government. Now we equate that because of some of the actions of dictators through history.
This was unheard of, as the dictatorship was supposed to be a 6-month emergency measure. Why did the Senate do this? If Caesar made
It'd be
a power
worrisome for a
grab,
lot of people,
many
right?
in the Senate feared the worst. By preempting him, the Senate believed that they could keep Caesar within the bounds of the law, and by attaching a time limit to their offer, they would be able to revisit this whole arrangement in 10 years' time.
Kind of almost like an appeasement in a way. They think they're fearful this guy's going to come in and just maybe eliminate everything that the Senate has going for it. So give him some power, right? And maybe that'll like appease him in a way. That's the kind of vibe I'm getting here right now.
Caesar would probably be in a weaker position than he was right now, and with a little luck, they might be able to push him into retirement. The Senate also gave Caesar permission to serve as consul consecutively for the next 5 years, which, when paired with the dictatorship, would give him a free hand to push through pretty much whatever legislation he wished. Alongside this, Caesar was also handed a bunch of new powers. I'm not going to go down the whole laundry list, but they included the power to declare war and issue pardons when
Let's just take a quick look, though. We'll just pause real quick. Okay, so they just said declare war and peace and issue pardons. Executive powers that actually a lot of governments have right now. Like in America, though, the leader themselves cannot declare war. That has to come through Congress, but can issue pardons. Okay, but the other ones, we got triple Caesar's bodyguards. Okay. He probably needs that because, he's got such a love-hate relationship in Rome. Preside over elections. Okay. Other miscellaneous authoritarian stuff. 40 days of Thanksgiving. Okay.
But they included the power to declare war and issue pardons whenever he wished. This was some real authoritarian stuff. The Senate still held on to some legislative authority, but they were making one hell of a gamble.
Okay.
When Caesar returned to Rome,
so far.
he asked the Senate to meet with him outside the Pomerium. He told them that he had conquered new territory for Rome, and that he had been hailed as imperator by his armies. He formally asked their permission to cross the Pomerium under triumph. In fact, he said that he was qualified for 4 triumphs, one for Gaul, one for Egypt, one for Asia Minor, and one for North Africa.
Got a winning record.
It's worth briefly explaining each of these claims.
Real quick, back to the imperator kind of idea, and actually more deep than that, the whole relationship between generals and the military. In ancient Rome, again, they have such a vast empire, right? I mean, look how big it is, and it's filled with people of a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different territories, right? So, like, you would have a lot of these soldiers, right? These Roman soldiers that are fighting for Rome, okay? And this, like, idea of Rome. The city of Rome itself was probably a place that most of these soldiers had never been to and only heard about. So, I think it's a little bit harder to have a loyalty as a soldier to a place you've actually never been. Now, remember, too, they would incorporate people from conquered territories sometimes into the military because, again, the more you conquer, the more military you need to hold that, right? So what the point I'm getting to is people or soldiers could often tend to be more loyal to their general than, say, an abstract idea of, like, the glory of Rome. Okay. Now, these soldiers, of course, they're loyal to because they're hoping to get something in return. These soldiers or these generals would make promises to them, right? You can get land, you get pay, and those sort of things. And if they had that relationship, then yeah, they would be very loyal to that. And I think in a lot of cases, maybe for some in Julius Caesar's case, you'd have a lot of these soldiers that are actually probably more loyal to him than like the Senate. You know what I mean? Because that's more of an abstract concept. They've never experienced Rome on that kind of level. But that's something that definitely goes on in Rome itself, specifically among the military, where the loyalties actually lie.
In Gaul, he had annexed a bunch of territory and been hailed as imperator. Gaul was totally legit. In Egypt, it gets more complicated. If you remember, Caesar lost a battle, then won a battle, then negotiated a settlement where he handed a Roman province over to the Queen of Egypt. Giving away a province is kind of the opposite of conquering territory. The Egyptian campaign should not have qualified for a triumph.
Yeah, didn't really
In
win,
Asia
right?
Minor,
Not overall.
Caesar won a decisive battle, but all he really did was restore the status quo. That doesn't really count as conquering new territory, although I guess it's debatable. As for North Africa, this one's really complicated. Caesar won a decisive battle, but in this case it was against his own countrymen. For the sake of public relations, Caesar argued that King Juba of Numidia was the brains behind the North African campaign.
That was complicated,
but this
huh?
was not true. After Caesar's victory, he shifted some of the Numidian client kingdoms into one of Rome's existing provinces, which is kind of just an administrative thing, but I guess technically counts as conquering new territory. Of Caesar's 4 proposed triumphs, 3 were questionable.
And I think that's why the general public, general public and people that know just at least a little bit about Rome, really only hear about the triumph, right? They're using that term in Gaul, where he was most, and they're kind of confirming the most, as far as decisive as like a clear victory for himself and for Rome. Very much more cut and dry, and that makes a little bit of sense now, since he was involved in some of these other conflicts. But you really mostly just hear about Gaul.
Of Caesar's 4 proposed triumphs, 3 were questionable. Nevertheless, the Senate signed off on all of them.
So on paper,
I'm going to spend a few
proved all of
minutes
them.
going through each of Caesar's 4 triumphs, but if this
Cool.
piques your interest at all, you should know that I made a video where I break down each step of the Roman triumph in excruciating detail.
Okay.
Learning about the Roman triumph ruins every parade you see for the rest of your life. Caesar's 4
Wait, this is part of it?
ruins every parade you see for the rest of your life.
Oh, okay. So, this is part of the parades for the triumph, religious stuff, military convocations, killing prisoners, animal sacrifice. So I don't know, in these triumphs, these things that they would do, like to celebrate that? Interesting.
Life. Caesar's 4 triumphs would be celebrated on
Sounds
4
very Roman
separate
of them, though,
days
right?
in the order in which they occurred. Gaul, then Egypt, then Asia Minor, then North Africa.
Okay. That's not all in a year, though.
The
Is that what
conquest of
were they gonna
Gaul
focus
was
on, though?
Caesar's greatest achievement, and the Gallic
just his
triumph would serve
dictatorship?
as its living monument. Remember Vercingetorix, the so-called King of the Gauls? 6 years ago, Vercingetorix led a united Gallic army that almost succeeded in pushing the Romans out of Gaul. Caesar eventually captured Vercingetorix and defeated the united Gallic army, after which Rome would establish a permanent presence in Gaul. For the intervening 6 years, which included the entirety of the Roman Civil War, Vercingetorix had been rotting in a Roman jail. Why didn't they just kill him?
Yeah, why-
Well, for the
why not?
Romans, few things were more
Ransom?
prestigious than having a foreign king walk in one's triumph. This Roman tendency towards humiliation and cruelty extended Vercingetorix's life 6 years.
So it's not just enough to defeat the person. Romans wanted to humiliate the ruler for their own satisfaction, or are they trying to make an example out of him? You're not really making an example if you're taking him back home, though. Like, making an example to who? You know what I mean? So, interesting, the thought process behind that.
Caesar's Gallic triumph kicked off with wagons carrying paintings depicting Caesar's various victories over the Gauls. These were followed by even more wagons, hauling captured Gallic treasure. Walking
Major
alongside
parade,
these
right?
wagons were an assortment of Gallic prisoners, including the so-called King of the Gauls, Vercingetorix. After this, Caesar made his entrance by crossing the Pomerium and making his way up the Via Sacra before cheering crowds. As the name would imply, the Via Sacra was home to Rome's largest temples. As Caesar was passing the temple to Fortuna, the goddess of luck, one of the wheels on his chariot snapped and he was thrown onto the street. To the superstitious Romans, it appeared that the goddess of luck had finally abandoned Caesar.
Uh-oh.
After a brief delay, another chariot was found, and the triumph continued.
Bad omen.
As Caesar approached the Gallic triumph's grand finale, he decided to climb the steps to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on his knees in an act of penance. Hopefully, the goddess of luck would find this pleasing. After this bit of public humiliation, Vercingetorix, the so-called King of the Gauls, having played his part, was strangled to death. The rest of the Gallic prisoners met the same fate. An important part of the triumph is that Caesar's soldiers were permitted to cross the Pomerium and follow behind him along the triumphal route. By the end of the triumph, everybody was pretty loose, if you know what I mean. And
Can you imagine, like, all right, the Super Bowl champions, they get a, you know, you got the Patriots or something, and they're coming down Boston, and they have like the other team with them in cages or something like that, and then they go and like execute the, you know, quarterback of the other team or something like that. That's like the equivalence of what that would be like today, this triumph. And then
it was customary for the soldiers to entertain the crowd by singing rude songs. Suetonius, writing 150 years after the fact,
like
had access to sources
songs
that are now lost to us, and went to the trouble of transcribing one of the songs that Caesar's army sang during the Gallic
let's hear
triumph. It went something like this.
Get your SoundCloud ready or whatever. They need to get this up there. All right, Romans, watch your wives.
Watch your wives. Here's the bald adulterous whore.
Ooh.
We pissed away your gold and gall and come to borrow more.
Why would you do that? They're just gonna piss off everybody?
A few days later, after the partying had settled down a bit, it was time for the Egyptian triumph. As part of the negotiated settlement with Egypt, Caesar had taken Cleopatra's sister and former rival Arsinoe captive. Arsinoe was a former queen herself, and as such, she would become the second monarch to walk in one of Caesar's triumphs. By all accounts, Arsinoe was young, charming, attractive, and probably fluent in both Greek and Latin. We don't know exactly what she said or did, but whatever it was, the crowd immediately took a liking.
Remember the pharaoh and the leadership monarchy sort of Egypt. This is, you know, after Alexander the Great's conquest, right? And they imposed the Ptolemaic kind of dynasty there. So a lot of people talk about, like, they'll say like Cleopatra like wasn't really an Egyptian, and there's, you know, technically some truth to that because their lineage goes back to the Greeks, since the Greek conquest by Alexander the Great. But little side note there. That's where that argument comes from, and why she would like know Greek, you know.
We don't know exactly what she said or did, but whatever it was, the crowd immediately took a liking to her. Before too long, people were calling on Caesar to spare her life. Caesar, sensing the mood of the crowd, gave in to popular demand and allowed Arsinoe to take up residence in a Roman temple. There's no doubt that this move annoyed Cleopatra, but when you think about it geopolitically, Rome having a potential heir to the Egyptian throne in their back pocket seems like a pretty smart move.
It's gonna make a bigger impact later, right? With
a few days
the power
later,
struggle
it was
after
time
Caesar.
for the Asia Minor triumph, which celebrated Caesar's 5-day campaign that ended with the Battle of Zela. This would have been the weakest of the 4 triumphs, and it's probably no coincidence that none of the ancient sources have anything to say about it. And then, a few days later, it was time for the grand finale, the North African triumph. This triumph was pitched as a celebration of Caesar's victory over King Juba and the Numidians in North Africa. As usual, the triumph kicked off with a bunch of giant paintings. One of the first paintings depicted the Pompeian general Scipio stabbing himself in the stomach and tossing himself into the sea. Many in the crowd understandably found this painting offensive.
Yeah.
Why were they being shown the deaths of Romans? Where were the Numidians?
I don't want to see
Minutes
that.
later, another painting came into view. This one depicted the last moments of Cato's life, with the senator laying in bed, ripping out his own intestines with his bare hands.
Painting
This
of
was
that?
disgusting,
At the triumph?
even by Roman standards. It was now crystal clear that Caesar was much more concerned with celebrating the deaths of his fellow Romans than he was with the defeat of the Numidians.
All right. So yeah, you're getting some of the ambitions, I guess you would call it, of Caesar are starting to do. But again, what's the point, right? Is because these are to celebrate these triumphs, or is it also a way that Caesar is intimidating potential political enemies? Maybe.
The crowd turned against the triumph. Minutes later, the prisoners came into view. The most prominent person here was the new king of Numidia, a young child, probably under the age of 6. This child would be the third monarch to walk in one of Caesar's triumphs, which was an incredible accomplishment and a record that would never be broken. But the crowd had no interest in this achievement. They were in a sour mood and found the idea of putting an innocent child to death repulsive. The crowd started to get rowdy, and when Caesar came into view, they angrily demanded that he spare the boy's life. Caesar didn't have much of a choice. He enrolled the young king in a prestigious school, and left it at that.
Would he have? Would he have killed him? Like it.
When you add together each of Caesar's 4 triumphs, he hauled 2,000 tons of silver across the Pomerium. Currency conversion across 2 millennia is pretty much impossible, but just so you get a proper sense of scale, that much silver would be worth $1 billion today. The scale of Caesar's personal wealth had grown to that of a small country, and it was time to use that wealth to begin meeting some of his obligations. At the top of his list were his legions, who, in return for sacrificing so much, had received nothing but a bunch of promises. Caesar gifted each of his soldiers 1 silver talent, which, bearing in mind that currency conversion is pretty much impossible, would have been equal to like 10 or 15 years' wages.
Oh, wow.
Centurions were given 2 silver talents, and officers and command staff were given 4 silver talents. This was extremely generous, and everybody knew full well that this was coming right out of Caesar's pocket. But no wonder he was popular, right? Was just getting started, because Caesar then turned around and gifted every Roman citizen the equivalent of like 4 months' wages. This was a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one. The Roman aristocracy looked down their noses.
Yeah, look what he's doing with these financial gains. He has now solidified his military to respect him, right? That's going to be useful for future ventures. And now the Roman public with they say 4 months' wages, pretty much, of giving him that. And it's like everybody's getting something except, the Senate. They're the ones who are fearful of all this, right? So he's won over a lot of people in importance. People that work for him and the people that support him, the general population.
At this blatant political pandering, but since it was a private donation, they were in no position to do anything.
Nothing you can do about it except argue.
Despite this flurry of generosity, Caesar's full debt to his soldiers had not yet been paid. This is a rough estimate, but something on the order of 22,000 soldiers were currently up for retirement, and that number would only grow in the years to come. The Roman state owed every one of these men a plot of farmland and a cash bonus, and it was Caesar's responsibility to make sure that happened. But 22,000 is a big number, and even with unlimited funds, coming up with that much farmland would be tough.
They conquered so much territory, it's still not enough.
Solution. Luckily, Caesar was at the height of his political power. He had just been appointed dictator for an additional 10 years, and was at the very beginning of a 5-year run as consul. His first move was to push a bill through the Senate, setting up a mechanism through which farmers could sell their land to the government at inflated prices. This meant that Rome's failing farmers would be eligible for a little cash bailout. Of course, since this was a voluntary program, the full redistribution of 22,000 farms would take many, many years. Now that Caesar's veterans were being dealt with, some important political decisions needed to be made. The chaos of the Civil War had devastated the Senate. The size of the Senate tended to fluctuate year to year, but if you assumed perfect health and attendance, it could top out at like 800 members, although in practice, 300 was pretty typical. As you might imagine, the Civil War had pushed a lot of senators into early retirement and, well, death and by the year 46, Senate membership was down in the danger zone. Some back-of-the-envelope calculations said that there would not be enough qualified senators to properly staff Rome's provinces.
Okay.
Caesar would do three things to solve
get
this
more
problem.
senators.
He would expand the pool of available candidates. He would widen the filter that produced qualified candidates. And he would temporarily lower
the bar, right?
qualifications
Yeah, lower the
themselves.
qualifications.
This whole
So, yeah, you got to, I guess, fill it quick. Now, I'm sure he would like that all these people, the new people, because it sounds like there's a lot of open Senate seats, would want them to be supportive of him, right? And supportive of his actions. So, lower the bar, get more of them, you know. We'll see. I mean, it could work for him. It could work against him, right? With all these open seats.
whole thing was super consequential, and it would ruffle a lot of feathers. So let's get into it. Caesar widened the pool of available candidates by using his dictatorial powers to unilaterally appoint hundreds and hundreds of new senators. Who were these new senators?
Yeah.
They were basically everybody that Caesar had come into contact with over the last 15 years. A bunch of these new senators were retired centurions from his legions.
Yeah.
It goes without saying that these
like
guys
'em.
were loyalists.
Yeah.
He also appointed a bunch of aristocrats from the small and medium-sized cities that dotted the Italian countryside. Caesar had turned to this group for financial support.
Okay, so yeah, this would be a group that would probably be harder to win over than just the plebeians, right? Because plebeians, you can throw out money and you're good there. These people already have it. So having to win them over, I would think would be more of a challenge. So yeah, I kind of want to hear what he's going to say about this. I'm going to go back 10 seconds.
He also appointed a bunch of aristocrats from the small and medium-sized cities that dotted the Italian countryside. Caesar had turned to this group for financial support during the Civil
That's where all the
War,
money is.
and this political kickback only strengthened their loyalty to him.
Okay.
It was a canny move, since these aristocrats were pretty influential. And some of these new senators
Kinda
came
schmoozed
from
them, I guess?
outside Italy. During the Gallic Wars, Caesar had made commitments to some Gallic aristocrats in exchange for their support. Appointing these Gauls to the Roman Senate was a way of finally making good on these commitments. Let's make a few things clear about these Gauls.
Yeah.
For starters, these people had been given Roman citizenship ages ago. They were fluent in Latin. They wore Roman clothing. Their children got Roman educations. Nevertheless, the appointment of ethnic Gauls to the Roman Senate caused an uproar.
Yeah, they're foreigners, really, right? I mean, yeah, they speak Latin or whatever, and that's helpful, but they're not historically Romans, right? So you're bringing in all of these, foreigners. I could easily see how that would upset a lot of the sitting senators who take a lot of pride in having this Roman ancestry, and it's like, you guys are just conquered failures, you know what I mean? You're going to sit with us and have power with us. You could definitely see that being an issue. But you could then you see, though, from Caesar's perspective, probably part of the promises, because you see he makes a lot of deals with people, right? All kinds of people, rich, poor, military, whatever. And yeah, getting support of the Gallic elite, by saying, hey, you're going to get citizenship, and we're even going to put you in the Senate. That could definitely give you support. I could totally see that, but now I can see how this is going to provide a problem with sitting senators.
On the streets of Rome, people started telling a joke that went something like this: "The Gauls have crossed the Pomerium. They're asking for directions to the Senate House." There was a lot of loose talk at the time about senators showing up unable to speak Latin, sporting Gallic facial hair, wearing Gallic clothing,
How dare
practicing
them.
Gallic religion, but none of this was true. It was all just wild paranoia. By the time
Just big
Caesar
time.
had finished
Big time xenophobia going on here, just kind of fear of foreigners here going on, and then they're spreading these other rumors to marginalize them.
making all of his appointments, the Senate had quadrupled in size. Over time, the Senate would shrink back down to normal, but this would take at least a generation. As I said before, Caesar had good reasons for packing the Senate, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that at its heart, this was a power grab. The vast majority of the Roman Senate were now personally loyal to Caesar.
Do whatever he wants.
But the Senate packing thing wouldn't entirely solve the problem at hand. The only senators that were allowed to serve as governors were the ones who had been elected to one of Rome's two highest offices, consul and praetor.
Okay.
Because of the Civil War, many of Rome's former consuls and praetors were either dead or retired. It would take quite a long time to filter this expanded pool of politicians up the cursus honorum. So Caesar widened the filter by increasing the number of annually elected praetors from 8 to 10. But widening the filter wouldn't entirely solve the problem either. As a stopgap measure, Caesar used his dictatorial authority to appoint a bunch of underqualified politicians to the provinces. Caesar's old job as governor of Cisalpine Gaul went to one of the Senate's lowest-ranked senators, Marcus Brutus. 15 years his junior, Brutus was the son of Caesar's favorite mistress, and despite the fact that Brutus had sided with the Pompeians during the Civil War, Caesar was happy to take him under his wing. Caesar also singled out 10 loyal former praetors and awarded them with something called the dignity of a former consul. This was a totally made-up thing, but Caesar argued that it would be improper for certain provinces to be governed by anybody lacking the dignity of a former consul. In truth, it was just a way for Caesar to reward his allies for their years of service. Whatever.
Okay.
Caesar packaged these power-grabby political reforms with some more general anti-corruption stuff. This included a provision that said that any governor convicted on corruption charges would be automatically expelled from the Senate. This fight against corruption was one of Caesar's hobby horses. He believed that corrupt governors needlessly antagonized the locals, which put Rome at risk. The corrupt aristocracy did not much like these reforms, but they weren't in a position to do anything about it. Taken as a whole, this was a staggering number of reforms to come down all at once.
Let's just take a look real quick. So yeah, new senators, quadrupled in size at its height. Praetors, less qualified governors, yep. Dignity of a former consul, kind of elevating that status. And then, yeah, big anti-corruption. You'd think the corruption thing could be used as kind of a broom that you could take out a lot of people with. Maybe they have more detail about what is actually considered corruption, but you could see that as a tool of just getting rid of people that you don't like.
That's how it felt at the time, too. Number of reforms to come down all at once. That's how it felt at the time, too. Most of these bills were conceived and written up in Caesar's home, and would only see the light of day when it was time for the Senate to provide their rubber stamp. Cicero even notes that a few of these proposals showed up with his own name attached to them, which was quite the surprise. Now that the immediate political problems were out of the way, Caesar turned his eye to the public. Rome had a ton of systemic issues that had been in a state of neglect since before the Civil War. The largest of these, and the one that had the most direct impact on the lives of everyday citizens, was the grain dole. Quite simply, the grain dole provided free or subsidized grain for Rome's poorest citizens at the state's expense. The significance of the grain dole is kinda hard to wrap your head around, so think of it like this. For most of world history, most people spent most of their money on food. The grain dole took 320,000 of Rome's poorest citizens and eliminated their largest household expense. This was one of the most effective government-run anti-poverty programs in world history.
Because if it's... Let's go back to their chart here.
Poorest citizens and...
Okay, so how much they spend on food. So if they can afford that, first off, the government can subsidize that. I mean, look how much, you're spending on food. It's nothing like they were saying, nothing like what we have today. Food is now quite cheap and plentiful, and far more money goes to other things. That's why, land ownership and stuff would be hard, because you don't have that kind of income. But I guess a question would be, is if they're getting rid of 2/3 or whatever this you're saying here of their budget going to so much food, what are they then going to use that money on? and will it come back into the economy that way?
Eliminated their largest household expense. This was one of the most effective government-run anti-poverty programs in world history, and frankly, nobody would improve on it until basically the modern welfare state. But after years of neglect, cracks were beginning to show. Poor citizens were having a hard time getting onto the grain dole without bribing bureaucrats. This was made worse by the fact that families who maybe a generation earlier had qualified for the grain dole were able to keep their names on the lists long after rising out of poverty. Rich people were collecting benefits that were intended for poor people.
Yeah, so it got corrupted, because there's so much filtration that has to happen, going from where this food's going to come from and then how it's actually distributed to the people. So it looked like on paper it was a much better idea than actually in practice, is where all that corruption comes in. Where is it being delegated to the right places and to the right people? And it looks like it's not.
Poverty. Rich people were collecting benefits that were intended for poor people. This was leading to a lot of social resentment. Caesar dramatically restructured the grain dole. He cut the number of eligible recipients in half, from 320,000 to 150,000.
Surface, that wouldn't sound good to
But he
people.
also implemented stronger political oversight, so that these 150,000 people were legitimately Rome's poorest citizens.
Okay.
This thankless job, but it was something that had captured Caesar's imagination a while back, and for whatever reason, he was hell-bent on tackling it now. We're talking about the Roman calendar.
Oh, yeah. Interesting what he does.
We don't need to go into all the details, but for starters, it was a lunar calendar, as in it followed the phases of the moon. The phases of the moon do not line up with the solar year, which means that lunar calendars always drift out of sync with the seasons.
Right.
It was the job of the Pontifex Maximus and his College of Pontiffs to monitor this drift and to manually add days to the calendar as needed. The current Pontifex Maximus happened to be Julius Caesar, and as we know, Caesar had been indisposed for like a decade and a half. As a consequence, the Roman calendar was a good 3 months out of sync, which, as far as calendars go, is kind of a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, I would
But
say.
Caesar had just spent the better part of a year in Egypt, where he learned that the Egyptians used a nearly perfect 365-day solar calendar. Caesar enlisted the help
Much more
of
accurate.
an Egyptian astronomer named Sosigenes of Alexandria, and together they designed a new Roman calendar, loosely modeled on the Egyptian system. Like the Egyptian calendar, the new Roman calendar would be 365 days.
It's going to look a lot
at
more
start.
similar to you.
But the Egyptian calendar did have some flaws. They evenly divided the year into 12 months of 30 days each, which
That's not
adds
it.
up to 360. And then they manually added in 5 extra days at the end of the year to make the math work. Those 5 extra days were a problem. Under the Roman system, these days would be administered by the Pontifex Maximus, and if administered incorrectly, the calendar would begin to drift again. That would not do. Caesar and Sosigenes wanted this new calendar to run on autopilot, so they took those 5 extra days and peppered them throughout the year, creating a bunch of 31-day months.
Yep.
The month of February was considered
Every other-
unlucky,
pretty much almost
and for
every other.
superstitious reasons, they bumped it back to 28 days, as it had been under the
That's
old
always an
system,
interesting one,
and
right?
offset this with even more 31-day
February
months.
gets shafted.
But according to Sosigenes, even the nearly perfect Egyptian calendar was slightly out of alignment, since it did not take into account the actual length of the year, which was 365 and a quarter days. Under the old Roman
Leap
calendar,
year.
the traditional
Fix that.
place to insert extra days had been during the month of February, and so Caesar and Sosigenes invented a system where an additional day would be automatically inserted into that month on every 4th year. They made it very clear that this was not one of those extra days that the Pontifex Maximus could tinker with. This would be an automatic process, out of the hands of the politicians. With that, the new Roman calendar was complete. But there was still a problem. The current date was still 3 months out of alignment. So here's a tricky
what do you do?
question that you can bore your friends with.
Eliminate
What
some stuff.
was the longest year in human history?
Okay.
Seems like a trick, but it's not. In order to bring the Roman year back into alignment, Caesar inserted 90 extra days into the year 46 BCE, making it a 445-day year.
All right, so it was literally the longest day in history to catch up to the calendar, so 90 days. Can everyone just have it off? Just like, hey, free summer for everybody.
Which was 25% longer than normal. On January 1st of the year 40.
You know, before it continues, it really is impressive how in this time they had such a good grasp on like the solar year, and knowing they were like 3 months behind and out of sync little bits by little bits each year based off of the relationship with the sun. That really is impressive. It really is.
Percent longer than normal. On January 1st of the year 45, the new Roman calendar, which is known to us as the Julian calendar,
That's
came
our
into
calendar.
effect. Automating the calendar and getting it out of the hands of politicians was a great human achievement. Aside from some minor upgrades in the 16th century, the system devised by Caesar and Sosigenes survives more or less intact to this day.
Let's go ahead and look at that. Julian calendar, using the best available science at the time, created a 365.25 day year. Yeah, that's what we use. Earth actually has, it's pretty close, right? It's pretty close. That's amazing, you know, having that kind of accuracy too. Over the centuries, the Julian calendar drifted out of alignment. I mean, yeah, tiny bit. The Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian calendar in 1582 and brought the year back into alignment by skipping 11 days. I mean, that's really the only way you could do that. Otherwise, you have to change how long a day is by just fractions of time. You know what I mean? And that just doesn't work. So yeah, you have to kind of mess with it. I mean, yeah, it's impossible to have it there. You'd have to change how long seconds are, because you know, microseconds can add up to small changes over time. You know what I mean? The new Gregorian system updated the leap year mechanism. Okay, going forward, 3 of every 100 leap years would be skipped. Okay. In the 49th century, the Gregorian calendar will drift 1 day out of alignment. Humans in the future will be able to fix this by skipping a leap year, although there are no current plans to do so. The 49th century. Wow. That's a long time. And then it says this minor imperfection is unacceptable. Nice.
By Caesar and Sosigenes survives more or less intact to this day. While Caesar was busy in Rome, something was happening out in the provinces.
Oh?
Without warning, the Spanish governors began writing in, requesting reinforcements. Before Caesar could even act, Rome's 2 Spanish provinces had fallen to the enemy. What enemy? Caesar's old right-hand man Labienus had joined forces with 2 of Pompey's sons. Rome's disgruntled Spanish legions had eagerly gone over to their side. Caesar had been caught entirely flat-footed. Apparently, the Roman Civil War wasn't over yet.
That's a story for another time, right? Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, just immediate thoughts. That was great. I learned a ton. I learned a ton about, especially some of his rule, a little bit more of the specifics about it. A lot of those things I had heard, but you know, hearing them again and some of the other kind of stories with it, that was really, really cool. That's a great kind of just rundown, I guess, of, because really not a lot of, well, I mean, kind of a lot of time was covered, but also kind of not. But I thought it was really good to more look at him as a politician and like a governor than necessarily like a military commander, because they didn't really give a lot of specifics of that, which is fantastic. I like that. I want to, hear about him that way. So that was great. That was very good. Now, it looked like one of the longer videos, I think, that of the series I had seen. And, you know, from what they were saying first, it sounds like a lot of these, there was parts of this video that they did specific videos on that went in even more detail, like the 4 campaigns. That might be interesting to kind of revisit there. But I kind of like more, especially for my channel here, more of these kind of broader ones. I think they're easier to or a little bit better to comment on. But anyway, very cool. So, well, great. Yeah, that was my first experience with this channel, and I could see why a lot of people, especially, man, if you're a fan of Rome, I mean, it kind of looks like this might be your kind of go-to in a way. Just seeing how much content, just browsing through what they had on their videos, how much content they have, and some of the quality stuff. So that's awesome. If there are other specific videos from this series that you think would lend itself well to kind of what I do on my channel, you can definitely suggest more of those. Just to plug a few ways to suggest videos. What probably the best way to do that, and the one that can get a little more direct and a little bit more stored with the suggestions, is actually joining our Discord server. There's a link to the Discord server in the description. You'll see a channel in there for video suggestions. That's a little bit better of a place for me to find things. YouTube comments, you can do it there too, but sometimes they can get lost if there's a lot of them. But either way, it's very useful. But I invite you to join the Discord, even if you don't necessarily care about what the specific videos you want to promote. We got a community of people that like to talk history, and it's pretty active. A few other things I'd like to plug before we head out today. If you'd like to support this channel in some other ways, Patreon is a great way to do that. There'll be a link to the Patreon as well. Like I said at the beginning of the video, one of the kind of perks I give right now is I put up right now a weekly poll of some of the videos that have been suggested that sound kind of interesting to me, and the patrons vote on those, and I will kind of fast track those videos into my sort of backlog of the many videos I have kind of lined up. That's one way to do it too. A couple other ways to support the channel. You can make donations through Streamlabs as well as Super Chats, as I premiere a lot of these videos, do live premieres. Those are fantastic ways to support the channel too, to keep this going as well. Okay, but like I always say, donations never expected. They are just very appreciated if you ever feel so inclined. But regardless, the most important thing is that I appreciate that you're joining me, spending some of your time with me, as again I continue to try to learn more and more, better myself as a history teacher, and having people on that sort of journey with me is why I do this. So, all right, with that, very last thing here, if you like the original video, I'll have a link in the description to the original video. You can give them a like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and call it here, and hope to see you soon. Bye.